There's been an air of positivity coming from both the Nets brass, the coaches, and the players around Ben Simmons this offseason in a way that we really haven't heard about him coming from this way from the team up until now. Does it strike a note of positivity around you as the fan as well, with Ben Simmons possibly on the comeback trail leading into 2023? We are going to talk about all that and more, but right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day of the week. I am Doug Norrie, the owner and operator of DFSR.com. Been doing fantasy projections for the last decade or so. Come and check it out over at DFSR.com. You can grab a free 3-day trial. We're rolling there for NBA when it comes back around, NFL too, baseball through that season. So it's all covered for you at DFSR.com. No Adam Armbrecht in the house today as he takes a couple days off here to close off the week. Much deserved. My man carried the ship here for weeks, it seems like, when I was on vacation. Tons to talk about, though, going into the offseason here. You know, you think that you're in the offseason and things are going to slow down, but when you're in the Nets world, there seems to always be something cropped up. Want to remind you, or thank you, just for making Locked On Nets your first listen of the day, free and available on all podcast networks and YouTube as well. Locked On Nets. All right, the topic for today is Ben Simmons. It's been something that's we've kind of been flitting around the edges of sort of discussion over the course of Summer League so far, just in the way things have cropped up around Simmons, and just in covering the different Summer League games and some of the stuff that we saw from the rookies. Wasn't anything that we wanted to, that we really fully delved into in terms of sort of some of the talk and just outright quotes that we've been hearing from different players, from the coach, from the general manager, when it comes to Ben Simmons, in a way that I just have to be honest, in a way I don't think we've ever heard anyone really in the organization talk about Ben Simmons in this way. I really, really positively since he became a Net. Not to say that anyone really talked about him negatively, not really trying to imply that, but really for the better part of, I mean, it's been more than a year and a half now that he's been with the Brooklyn Nets. It's I don't know if it seems long or seems short to me. It's probably somewhere in between. But in that time, we've often commented how there really just wasn't ever much said about Ben Simmons at all. That was just didn't seem to ever really be the case. It seemed to be just not a topic that was discussed all that much outside of some health updates and maybe some confusion around when he was going to be coming back from different ailments during the seasons. But in general, Adam and I would often talk about how we just were like always a little surprised. People didn't seem to be mentioning Ben Simmons really at all. I mean, it didn't seem like he had a ton of players coming to his defense when maybe there was times where he could have. Didn't seem like sometimes when it seemed like the front office or the coaching staff could have possibly come to his defense or even lent clarity around some of his situations. It didn't really seem like it happened. And it always struck us and me as a little confusing about why that was the case with Simmons. And not to delve into, or not to sort of dissect things that haven't been said, but sometimes silence is deafening around players or just really around any topic. And I've always kind of felt that way of Ben Simmons, although I have to say, as we roll through this summer and some of the stuff that's come out in Summer League, some of that does seem to be changing. And really from the top down, we're hearing sort of new talking points when it comes to Ben Simmons, from Marks to Jacque Vaughn. Spencer Dinwiddie is on the record now. Guys that were attending Summer League or part of podcasts, and there's some media rounds that guys are doing right now. Summer League kind of lends itself to that. A lot of players are sort of doing maybe favors and just to their friends and jumping on different podcasts. So there's been a lot of just sort of content out there lately among Nets guys, and Simmons' name has come up a lot, and it's in a way that has me not thinking necessarily differently about the situation, but at least the talk around the situation is different, and that can't be really read any other way but very, very positively if you're a Nets fan, because it's easy to say nothing in situations like that, but the different players that we're going to talk about here, players like in the organization, that is, have just seemed to take a slightly different tact when it comes to updating the Ben Simmons situation, talking about him as a player, talking about him as a teammate, and actually what he just means for the organization going forward. And it's like I said, it stands out because it's different. Like we've been talking about the Nets for years and years now, covering this on a daily basis for years and years. And I just know this has not been sort of the tenor of the conversation when it comes to Ben Simmons. And by the way, we haven't heard from Ben Simmons himself. That's fine. He didn't attend Summer League. He's rehabbing. We'll get into some of what he's doing now too. So all of this kind of comes from other people. And I want to give you some of the quotes that came out around Simmons, and we can start to sort of formulate an opinion about where it ends up standing with him, and where you sort of stand in feeling positive or maybe hopeful about this situation coming forward with him. So the first guy, this isn't necessarily in order that these came out, but I'll just go down the chart organizationally because I think that makes the most sense. Sean Marks was at Summer League, was talking to reporters at Summer League and talking about a wide range of just sort of topics as ends up happening at these things. It's as much about the media there as anything else. And I won't go through all of his quotes, but end up paraphrasing some of the things that Mark said. He updated that Ben Simmons is training in Miami, that they had gone down and met with him and he said something that I thought was interesting. He said he's in great shape physically and mentally. So for some guys that maybe wouldn't necessarily matter, but we know for Simmons that this is something that's come up by his own mouth, right? By his own admission, has come up in the past as part of the reason he wanted to end up leaving Philadelphia. He had talked about the mental health aspect of the situation when it came to his play and how it might be affecting it. So for Marks to go on record here and say that he was feeling, like I said, I'll repeat, great shape, both physically and mentally, that does strike a chord for me to say, okay, they're kind of paying attention to both aspects of this situation when it comes to this player, that it's not just good enough for him to just be in great shape. Like we've seen his Instagram feed, right? We know that he's been working out. That's been something that's, sort of become a running joke at times during the offseason about the Ben Simmons workouts. But for Marks to go and say that, both aspects of sort of him as a person and as a player seem to be melding here during the offseason in a really positive way does make you start to feel, okay, hey, maybe things are really, really on the right track. He says he's going to be ready soon. When Marks was asked about when it came to the FIBA Worlds and why Simmons ultimately was left off of the roster for Australia, because remember we had talked about whether or not he would end up being part of that Australian team. It ended up not being the case for him, that he was going to be able to go out and play, just because, and according to Marks, it says because they, quote, ran out of time. What that means necessarily, he didn't really go into detail, except that he kind of followed it up, or in that same conversation said something that you might maybe this is the part where you might say to yourself, okay, well, are we that positive? Because he said, as of right now, recording this July 12th, the quote was on July 10th, that Ben Simmons was not part of 3-on-3 or 5-on-5 drills as it stands now, meaning he's not really playing live basketball. Look, we're in the middle of July. That's okay. There's still plenty of time for this. Some of these guys aren't even, people are training for sure, but how much live basketball is getting in right now, unclear. We know these guys play a lot of pickup and stuff like that, but Simmons is not playing 3-on-3 or 5-on-5 as of right now. So where he is exactly in the rehab process isn't exactly clear. We do know that it's not live basketball, and I know some people thought to themselves, ooh, that's maybe he's a little behind schedule. But Marks didn't seem to think that was the case, right? It didn't seem to be all that concerned. So overall, from Sean Marks, I would say not an overwhelmingly positive, but a very positive update when it comes to Ben Simmons and where he sort of is on the recovery chain, or just getting ramped up to play. Again, maybe you would have liked to see him play for Australia, get some live basketball in before the beginning of preseason. That's not going to happen, but Marks, at least from a front office point of view, seems to think that he is on the right track. Want to get into what Jacque Vaughn said about the situation. Want to get into what Spencer Dinwiddie said about the situation as well. We will get all into that here in a second. first, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at Bird Dogs. These are always the easiest reads we do because Bird Dogs just make you look good, man. The stretch khaki shorts designed to fit really slim through the thigh and leg gives you that sculpted look. I am wearing the Bird Dogs right now. I know I've said for the multiple times we talked about Bird Dogs on the podcast that I'm wearing them. That's just because I really actually never take the Bird Dogs off. They came in the mail about a month and a half ago. I don't think there's been more than one day in a row where these things haven't been worn because they're just the best shorts I've ever worn. They fit better than regular shorts. Those other ones are made of that stiff, restricting cotton, not Bird Dogs. They invented the cloud knit fabric. Looks like khaki, but it stretches, gives you that slimmer fit. You don't have to sacrifice any movement. These things are super versatile. They just can go you wherever you want to go. You're going for a workout, Bird Dogs. You're going out for sort of a night like on the summer town, Bird Dogs, right? Family, Bird Dogs, it's all there. Bird Dogs has you covered. They're even going to throw in the free gift tumbler. I got that going for you right here off camera as I read. I'll throw that in the front here. The Bird Dog tumbler. You see this thing's a little bit beat up because I've been walking around with this thing for as long as I've been wearing the Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs are the best shorts I've ever wore. Points stop. This one is an easy one because it's just the truth. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or enter the promo code LockedOnNBA for a free Yeti style tumbler. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or promo code LockedOnNBA for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. All right. Let's get into some more of the quotes that we've been sort of getting into around Ben Simmons and some of the stuff that we've heard from the organization, stuff that we've heard from, we obviously just mentioned there a minute ago, what Sean Marks had said about it. And I think to some degree, look, before we get into Jacque Vaughn and then Spencer Dinwiddie, it's again worth noting that organizationally, these guys have never talked negatively about Ben Simmons, right? There really hasn't. Was there frustration maybe from the Steve Nash press conferences back in the day when it was unsure if he was going to be out in the court for leading into the playoffs 2 years ago? Yeah, I think there was uncertainty. Maybe there was frustration then, but we haven't really heard negative stuff come out about it. I just always will reiterate, we just never really heard anything coming out from these guys when it came to Ben Simmons or his availability. And again, this is a guy we're talking about who, is one of the highest paid players in the team and is sort of integral to the team's success when it comes to season over season, just like their ability to win because he, at his peak, is a really, really good player and he makes a ton of money. And guys like that, you just want to be playing for you well. So we always just thought it was a little odd when we just really wouldn't hear much about him. Jacque Vaughn jumped on the NBA TV broadcast. This was at the beginning of Summer League. So this was the first game of Summer League. So we're going back a little bit with the quotes. Vaughn was on with Channing Frye, and I forget who the play-by-play announcer was for that one, but he sat down in the middle of one of the Summer League games and they were kind of just going back and forth. They talked about a bunch of different stuff with the team, where the team was, sort of expectations, things that they were going into thinking going into this year. And he didn't talk for as long about Simmons, but he did talk about sort of the positivity around him and his youth and his ability to sort of make a full comeback for the team. He talked about how health is the key, how he's still in an age tier where it was going to be like, he mentions something along the lines of like, if he was 35, I'd be worried about it, but that's just not the case with Simmons. He's in his 20s, he's in his mid to late 20s, he's 27. And when you're that old, sort of health stuff isn't as big of a concern when you talk about the comeback piece. And this is another piece I think that's really important to think about when it comes to Simmons, because what has been made a decent amount or has been talked about often is like sort of the reasons why Simmons hasn't returned to the play that he had a few years ago, where he was like basically all NBA and was just absolutely electric on the court, and just like why it wasn't the case. And there's always going to be, gradient reasons of like why these things are the case. I think sometimes it's like very A to B with an injury. I think Simmons, the reasons have always been a little bit cloudier because he himself threw in the mental aspect of the game on when he was looking for his exit from Philadelphia. The reason that becomes a part of it is because that becomes a conversation around Simmons and whether or not you believe, or whether it's the case or not, around the return to full basketball has been strictly physical because of the back and knees, or is it a mental thing? There's like sort of a mental block with him when it comes to being on the basketball court, or was it a mix of both? My guess is it's somewhere like the latter, right? It's a mix of both where it's not gaining full trust in his body as he comes back from the microdiscectomy, which we know can take 18 months to 2 years to have a full recovery from, as that has been the case with other players out there. And if you combine that recovery with maybe a part of his game where he had lost some confidence in his ability to play, then I think that probably goes a long way to explaining exactly like sort of why it looked the way it looked for Simmons at times on the court last year. And you know what I'm talking about. We watched the games, right? Like we saw Simmons out there. We saw there was times where it looked really confident, getting downhill, strong, fast, like sort of shades of the old Simmons. And then there would be times where it looked very, very hesitant, where it looked like he had no interest in ever shooting the ball ever again, where it looked like, he would sort of stop short in the lane and throw up a floater, where in time, or, sort of like these little running baby hooks, where those would have been strong finishes at the basket before. And, we just saw like those, you can see with your own eyes when a player just looks tentative or looks a little different than he had looked in the past in terms of his overall play. And I think that was the case with Simmons. Vaughn doesn't go into the mental side, the mental or emotional piece of it here. He just strictly talks about the health when it comes to his overall, just that being the thing that he's rehabbing. I think that's a very good sign too. I think there seems to be at least a running dialogue in the organization right now where Simmons is concerned that it seems like, hey, this is a health thing. We're going to get over this hump. He looks good right now. He's working hard. He's integral to this team's success. And when he's playing his A game, then that is like, that kind of tells the whole story for him. Where it lands with Vaughn going into the season, we'll see. Look, we still have to see him get on the court. I'm sure Jacque Vaughn, it feels the same way, like has to see sort of what comes out of this training and what happens getting into the preseason. But it does sound like Vaughn is at least kind of leaning toward confidence when it comes to Simmons around his ability to make a comeback here, and maybe thinking that it is only the health. And I know if you're on team health and team back when it comes to Simmons and what you feel has been the only problem, then you're probably very encouraged by this line of talk too. And you should be, and we all should be, right? Like, hey, are we clearing some of the mental hurdles here? Are we clearing some of the things that were bothering him, that were maybe having him lose a little confidence in his game? Was the back and the knees the big reason why he was just feeling possibly tentative, or why the basketball looked the way it did? Yeah, then if you feel that way, then these are really, really good signs where Ben Simmons is concerned. Because if it's just that, then I think we can start feeling really confident about a return to the play that we saw from Ben Simmons just a few years ago. A guy who was an absolute wrecker on defense, or a guy who could really, really facilitate with the ball, a guy who could get to the basket. And yeah, the shot hasn't been there and the free throws really haven't been there, but he made up for it to a huge extent just by sort of doing everything else on the court. Like, go back to his 2019-2020 season with Philadelphia, 16.5 points, 8 assists, just about 8 rebounds. Year before, 17 points, 7.7 assists, close to 9 rebounds. I mean, this is a dude that it didn't matter as much when he wasn't, taking threes or just like, taking mid-range jumpers or not, because the physicality and the overall athleticism sort of told the whole story for him. And if we're looking like we're getting back to that case, and that seems to be the case maybe with what Jacque Vaughn is saying around the health returning, then I think you're feeling really, really good about it. Want to get into what Spencer Dinwiddie also had to say about the Ben Simmons sort of experience on the court and what Ben Simmons would mean for the team. We'll get into that in a second. Before we get to that, let you know that this episode is brought to you and sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, you're dealing with life right now. Life can be complicated. Life can feel like it's just coming at you from all different directions. Maybe it's your career. Maybe it's your relationships. Maybe it's just like getting through the day-to-day that sometimes can just really, really feel overwhelming. You want help navigating your life. You want to be able to move forward with confidence. You want to be able to move forward with excitement. It's time to give therapy a try. Trust yourself to make decisions that align with your values. The more you practice, the easier it gets. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. Okay. It's designed to be convenient. It's flexible. It's suited to your schedule. All you have to do with BetterHelp, you fill out a brief questionnaire. You get a match with a licensed therapist. You switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. They're going to help you find someone that lines up with you, someone that lines up with just your personality, your needs, the things that you're looking for in therapy. They've solved this problem. They can help you with yours. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, finish it out here with some quotes from Spencer Dinwiddie as well. Dinwiddie kind of went into the most detail when it comes to just talking about his just like what it comes down to, like with Ben Simmons and the experience with Ben Simmons on the court, and in some ways got as granular and specific as anybody else. So I'm going to actually read you exactly what Dinwiddie's quotes are, because I think they really sort of this was another example of like, we haven't heard too much of players talking like this specifically about Ben. That look, sometimes you're just not asked. Like, you're not going to say things that you're not asked about, right? So I totally get that. It's not like talking about like these guys are just ignoring him. But I'll go through some of Dinwiddie's quotes because I think they really help sort of just lay the picture of what other players, guys on the team, might be thinking about Simmons when it comes to returning for this year. He says the easy answer, this is talking about success for the team, is Ben. He says, a healthy Ben is an all-star max level guy. I think he can completely change the complexion of our team. It can make us a really exciting group, especially defensively. I only got there, he's talking about Brooklyn, the last half of the year. Ben was already hurt, so I only played a handful of games with him. But I know him from his old Philly days, and for all intents and purposes, he can get back to that form. I think he's got it in him. Obviously a young guy, and I'm looking forward to seeing it this season. So obviously references the time back in Philly playing against Simmons and knowing what he can bring on the court. This is something we all know. We would talk about it for 25 minutes already on the podcast. Like, we already know like sort of what Simmons can bring on the court. We've been patiently waiting for that to be able be able to bring that to the team of the Brooklyn Nets. We've only seen it in fits and spurts. The quote here from Dinwiddie, I think, is good in that it lays the groundwork for the expectations around Simmons, but also just laying it in a very, very positive way, because there's an air of positivity around this rather than just saying like, oh, we'll wait and see. I hope he comes back. We'll see how it goes. Like those are the ways those quotes could have gone easily, because you can always just say, I'm not sure. I hope it comes back. We'll see. Like, you can just be really sort of wishy-washy on answers to questions like this if you don't know, or if you're really not sure. To be really definitive in his statements here about Simmons, about what Simmons can be, what he knows he can be, and the belief that Simmons is sort of not only crucial to the team, but that there's a belief that he can come back and retain and regain that old form, is great to hear. Is great. And we know Dinwiddie speaks his mind. We know this guy has had, some quotes in the past, but he never will hold back, right? He doesn't strike me or shouldn't strike you, because it's very obvious as a guy who worries too much about what's being said, right? He says what's on his mind. He's a smart dude. He's a pretty thoughtful guy. And the things that he says don't really ever have the air of just putting on airs for the media or for a podcast or whatever, just because, not to look bad. Like, that's just not Dinwiddie's MO. And that can be refreshing, even if sometimes there's times with guys like that you don't agree with it, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. Like, in the end, I think quotes like this coming from Spencer Dinwiddie are important, because he's a guy that does speak his mind in a really honest way. And there was no hesitation really about his answers about what the key was. Because again, it wasn't asked about Simmons. He wasn't prompted with a Simmons question. Excuse me. He just talked about Simmons as saying that this is a really, really important guy for the team. This is a guy that we need to make sure is on the comeback trail for us, because if he is, he changes the whole complexion about what they're doing. He changes their team as he just changes their lineups. He gives the lineups more fluidity. I'm putting words in his mouth now, but this is essentially what the thing is, right? The lineups have more fluidity. The defense can really be dialed up if they're going to play a switch heavy scheme, because he can guard essentially 1 through 5 on his best days. And there's just lots of elements to his game that the Nets desperately need. They could desperately need the rebounding. They could really use him in transition. They could really use him to be a facilitator of the offense. He can play with the spacing that they have with some of these other guys. Like you can see lineups with him and Dinwiddie and Bridges and Cam Johnson, right? Like those are lineups that are totally going to work. You can throw some of the other wings in there as floor spacers and they're all going to work. Does the mix with him and Claxton, is that perfect? No, that those lineups ended up working kind of because this KD and Kyrie were so good that it ended up, I don't think, looking sort of as mismatched as it was. So I'm not sure we're going to get those guys as starting lineups overall, and it'll be interesting actually to see where they start the season. I still think Simmons is going to come off the bench to start the season unless we see something totally crazy happen. But I just think that's probably where they're going to end up starting with him. But to hear Dinwiddie talk about this in this way, and again, say it unprompted, I think is a really, really good sign for sort of where we're looking at this from all stages of the organization. General manager, positive comments. Coach, positive comments. Player, positive comments. Like that's where you want to see from every rung of the ladder for where the Nets are going into this season. Guys talking about Simmons in a way that's positive, that's him going to be a contributor to this team, and that they just need him to be a contributor. And not to say that they're like putting the onus on him, but to just say, hey, look, if he can get back to what he can do on the basketball court, then this team goes up another level, to quote Spencer Dinwiddie. Like this team just levels up for sure. And when that's the case, and if we can see that to be the case, I think we'd be looking at this Nets team in a different light. If we knew we were getting 2019, 2020 Ben Simmons walking in the door, we'd be thinking about this Nets team very differently than we're thinking now. Maybe you're already thinking this about him. You're already on the positive side of the Ben Simmons talk here. Maybe you're already thinking about him in really positive terms, and you're already saying, hey, people are sleeping on the Nets because Ben Simmons is going to come back strong. And if that's the case, then hey, more power to you, because if that is what happens, the Nets are in a really, really good spot. So good stuff coming in here about Ben Simmons. No 3-on-3, no 5-on-5, but I think the rest of what we're hearing about what's happening for him in the offseason seems to be generally positive, and that is a good sign. Going to get out of here for the day. We'll be back again tomorrow talking some more stuff with Brooklyn. In the meantime, make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you're subscribed to YouTube. There's been, over the last couple of weeks, we've had special content that's just gone up on the podcast feed, had special content that's just gone up on the YouTube feed. Be subscribed to both, and then you won't ever miss what we have going on. Always get to the end of the podcast where Adam Armbrecht comes up with the quotes from the great all-time poets. This is Adam Armbrecht, one of the great all-time poets, and we will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.